Welcome back to West Virginia Media Lab podcast. You know, we always say West Virginia is wild and wonderful, and today we're going to look at something that definitely leans into that wild side.
I agree. This one might be our most mysterious topic yet.
We're talking about the white thing. Our research team just finished an ebook about it. Actually, it's the latest in our Cryptid Hunter series, and you can download it right now at westvirginiamedialab.com. But for those of you hearing about the white thing for the first time, let me just say this is a creature that really captures the imagination.
It absolutely does. It's one of those legends that lurks around the edges of our state's folklore. Not as widely known as Mothman, but maybe even more unsettling in some ways.
Okay, so let's get into it. What exactly are we dealing with here? Because the white thing is a bit of a shapeshifter when it comes to descriptions, right?
That's one of the things that makes it so fascinating and so difficult to pin down. Some people describe it as this enormous ghostly white dog, like something straight out of a horror movie.
Right. And others say it's more bear-like, but somehow like a bear that got stretched out in a funhouse mirror.
Exactly. And then you have the accounts that describe it as ape-like, standing upright with this unsettling intelligence in its eyes. It really is a creature of many forms.
And one thing that seems to be consistent across most accounts, those teeth and claws, whatever this thing is, it's definitely not here to make friends.
No, those details are pretty common. It's big, it's white, and it's got a set of teeth that could probably take a chunk out of a tree trunk.
So I think it's safe to say that no matter what form it takes, you don't want to bump into this thing in the woods.
Let's put it this way. If you see something large and white with glowing red eyes staring at you from the trees, I wouldn't recommend a casual hello there.
Okay, but is it possible that we're just dealing with people seeing what they want to see in the dark?
Yeah.
I mean, we've all been there, right? Shadows playing tricks on the eyes?
That's a great question, and that's where things get really interesting, because this lack of consistency in the descriptions doesn't just make the white thing mysterious, it actually taps into some pretty fundamental elements of human psychology.
You're talking about pareidolia,
Yeah.
right? That phenomenon where our brains try to make sense of random patterns, especially when we're afraid.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to find patterns and make connections even when none exist. And when you combine that with a dark forest and a healthy dose of fear, it's not surprising that people might see a monster where there's really just a shadow or an oddly shaped tree. So, is it possible that some white thing sightings can be explained by pareidolia? Absolutely, but does that explain all of them? I'm not so sure.
So what do you think could pareidolia account for? Those reports of glowing red eyes and massive claws. Maybe it's time to look at where this legend comes from. I mean, West Virginia is known for its rich folklore, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and I think understanding the roots of the white thing legend might give us some clues about what's really going on.
So we've got this creature that's hard to describe and might be playing tricks on our minds. But before we jump to any conclusions, let's talk about the roots of this legend. West Virginia has a long tradition of folklore, doesn't it?
It really does, and it's fascinating how these stories often blend Native American myths with European settlers' tales, all seasoned with a good dose of fear of the unknown.
That makes sense. I mean, before we had streetlights and smartphones to light up every corner, those dark forests must have felt truly wild and mysterious.
Exactly, and when you combine that kind of environment with a history steeped in tales of spirit animals and strange creatures, it's no wonder that legends like the White Thing emerge. It's like all the ingredients for a classic cryptid story are right there, just waiting to be woven together.
So we've got this place with a long history of strange stories, and we've got human psychology that's primed to see patterns in the darkness. It's the perfect recipe for a cryptid legend, isn't it?
It really is, and what's even more interesting is that these kinds of legends aren't unique to West Virginia. You find stories about spectral beasts all over the world.
Oh, absolutely. You've got Black Shuck in England, the Yetis in the Himalayas, even the Jersey Devil right here in the States.
These stories seem to tap into a primal fear that transcends cultures and time periods, that fear of the unknown, of the wildness that still exists just beyond our control. So maybe it's not so surprising that we find similar creatures lurking in the shadows of our collective imagination no matter where we go.
Okay, so we've talked about descriptions and psychology and the roots of the legend, but what about actual sightings? Has anyone ever really seen this thing, or are we just talking about stories?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unlike Bigfoot, there's no famous blurry photo or footprint cast to point to as proof, but what we do have is a pretty striking number of accounts from people who claim to have encountered the White Thing. And these aren't just city folk who got spooked by a stray dog. We're talking about hunters, farmers, people who know these woods like the back of their hand.
You're saying that these are people who are used to being out in the woods, who know the difference between a bear and a deer and a wild dog.
Exactly, and their accounts, while they differ in the specific details, often share some common threads, some elements that pop up again and again.
Okay, well, let's hear some of those accounts you mentioned, that some of them really stuck with you. What are some of the most compelling sightings?
Well, one that always comes to mind is the story of the charging beast of Boone County. It's a classic white thing encounter, and it really highlights just how unpredictable this creature can be.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, picture this. A group of men are walking through the woods in Boone County back in the early 1900s. It's quiet, eerily so, and then suddenly this massive white creature bursts out of the trees. It's silent at first, just watching them with those glowing red
Oh,
eyes.
that gives me chills already. So what happens next?
Well, just when they think they're about to become a cryptid snack, the creature lets out this horrifying scream and charges straight at them.
Oh my gosh, I bet they thought they were goners.
You'd think so, right? But just as suddenly as it appeared, the creature vanishes. Poof! Gone, leaving those men with a story they probably never forgot and a whole new level of respect for those woods.
Wow, that is terrifying. But you mentioned that there were other accounts that stuck with you. What else is out there?
Well, there's the story of the silent stalker. This one involves a lone hunter deep in the woods who gets the feeling that he's being watched. He turns around and there it is, this huge white creature just standing there watching him, too still to be natural, like it's observing him.
And what did the hunter do?
Well, being a hunter, he raises his rifle, but as soon as he does, the creature simply disappears like it was never there at all.
That's enough to make anyone swear off hunting for life. I think, is it more terrifying to imagine a creature that attacks or one that just watches you? It's like it knows something you don't.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? It taps into that primal fear of being stalked, of not knowing what's out there in the dark.
Okay, you mentioned one more account. What's the last one that really stood out to you?
Well, this one is different because it's not just a single encounter, it's a series of unsettling events. We call it the farmhouse incident.
Okay, this sounds creepy already. Tell me more.
So imagine you're a family living on a farm in West Virginia. You start noticing weird things happening. The livestock are acting strange. The dogs won't go outside at night. And then you find footprints, huge footprints in the mud, unlike anything you've ever seen before.
Oh, that would freak me out. And what happened next?
Well, the farmer finally sees the creature itself watching him from the edge of the woods, just a glimpse, but enough to confirm that something is definitely out there. And then the strangest thing happens. It just stops the weird events, the footprints, the sightings. It all just stops.
So the creature just disappears. Do you think it moved on or is it still out there watching?
That's the question, isn't it? And that's what makes this whole thing so unsettling. We're left with more questions than answers.
So we've got these eyewitness accounts, these strange encounters that defy easy explanation. It's definitely spooky stuff, but is it possible that there's a more rational explanation for all of this? Could the white thing be something other than a supernatural creature? We'll take a quick break and then come back to explore some of the possible explanations for this mysterious West Virginia legend. All right, so we've heard the stories, and they're definitely creepy. But before we go full-on cryptid, let's try to be a little skeptical for a minute.
That's a good approach. It's like they say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We've definitely got the extraordinary claims part down, but the evidence, well, that's a little harder to come by.
Exactly.
That's
So
fair.
let's put on our skeptical hats here. What are some of the more logical explanations for these white thing sightings?
The most common explanation is really just misidentification. People see something out in the woods, maybe under unusual lighting conditions, or when they're already a little spooked and suddenly their minds start filling in the blanks.
So you're saying it could just be a big white dog or maybe an albino animal?
Those are definitely possibilities. Albino animals are rare, but they do exist, and depending on the lighting and the situation, a regular animal could appear much larger or stranger than it actually is.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you explain those glowing red eyes that people report and the stories about the creature just vanishing into thin air? It's not something a dog or a deer can do, is it?
You're right, those details are a little harder to explain away with just misidentification. The red eyes could be eye shine, which is basically just a reflection of light off an animal's retinas. It's common in nocturnal animals, and it can look pretty eerie in the dark, but the vanishing act, yeah, that's where things get a little trickier.
So maybe it's not just a simple case of mistaken identity. Then again, it's hard to imagine a bear or a wolf just disappearing into thin air like that.
Exactly, and that's what leads some people to explore some of the more, well, let's say paranormal explanations for the white thing.
Okay, so let's go there. What are some of the more out there theories about what this creature could be?
Well, one theory that's particularly interesting is the idea that the white thing is some kind of protector spirit, a guardian of the mountains, if you will.
So like maybe a spirit that's connected to the land itself,
Yeah.
almost like it's watching over the area and sometimes warning people away from danger.
That's the idea, and it actually ties in pretty well with the Native American folklore we talked about earlier. The idea of spirit animals and that deep connection to the natural world.
Oh yeah, definitely. It makes you wonder, and it could also explain why the white thing is so often described as being silent and elusive, appearing and disappearing at will. It's like it's not bound by the rules of the physical world in the same way that a regular animal would be.
Okay, now you're giving me chills, but things get even weirder, don't they, when you consider the shapeshifter theory?
Ah, yes, the shapeshifter. This one really leans into the more mystical side of folklore, doesn't it?
So maybe the white thing isn't one fixed creature, but something that can change its form at will depending on the situation, or who knows, maybe even depending on who's looking at it. Exactly. That could explain why we have so many different descriptions of this thing. Maybe
Yeah.
people aren't really seeing things differently. Maybe they're just seeing different forms of the same creature.
Okay, now we are getting into some serious cryptid territory. But it does make you wonder if the white thing is so elusive, so hard to pin down, what if it's because it's not actually from around here?
You're talking about the interdimensional theory.
Yeah, what if this creature is actually an interdimensional being, slipping in and out of our reality?
That's definitely a popular theory among cryptid enthusiasts, and it's not entirely implausible. I mean,
Yeah.
some people believe that certain creatures like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster could be beings that exist outside of our normal dimensions.
So they're not just hiding out in the woods. They're hiding out in other realities, and they only pop into ours every once in a while.
It's a pretty mind-bending concept, but it could explain why these creatures are so hard to find and why they seem to defy the laws of physics as we understand them.
Okay, so we've got a lot of theories here. Everything from misidentified animals to interdimensional visitors. It's kind of enough to make your head spin.
And that's what's so fun about this stuff, isn't it? We may never know for sure what the white thing is, but the search for answers, that exploration of the unknown, it's what keeps the legend alive.
So let's say someone listening right now wants to go looking for the white thing themselves.
Yeah.
Where would they even begin?
Well, first of all, I'd say they'd need a healthy dose of courage and maybe a good luck charm, just in case, because if even half of these stories are true, this is not a creature you want to meet unprepared.
Oh, definitely not your average hike in the woods.
No, sir. As for locations, Boone County seems to be a bit of a hotspot for white thing sightings.
Makes sense. We talked about a lot of those classic encounters happening around there. Plus, it's
Yeah.
pretty remote, heavily forested. It's the kind of place where a creature like this could easily hide out.
Another possibility would be the Hatfield-McCoy Trail system, miles and miles of rugged terrain, and there have been a few reports of strange encounters near the trails as well.
Okay, so you've got your location picked out. What kind of equipment would you bring on a white thing hunt?
Well, the essentials, obviously, good hiking boots, a map and compass, can't emphasize that enough. You really don't want to get lost out there, especially at night.
Yeah, getting lost in the West Virginia woods is a whole other kind of scary story. We could do a whole episode on that.
Oh, absolutely. But beyond the basics, I'd recommend bringing some trail cameras, maybe some night vision gear, and some audio recording equipment, just in case you want to be prepared to document anything unusual you might encounter.
It's like a ghost hunter's toolkit, but for cryptids.
Exactly. And if you're feeling really ambitious, maybe even bring a drone, to get an aerial view of the area.
Okay, so you've got your gear. You're in the right location now. What's the best strategy for actually finding this thing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because based on everything we've discussed, this creature doesn't seem to follow any predictable patterns. It appears when it wants, where it wants, and then it vanishes without a trace.
So it sounds like it's really more about being in the right place at the right time and maybe hoping that the white thing decides it wants to be seen.
You could say that, or maybe it's about something more, maybe it's about respecting the wildness of these mountains, acknowledging that there are still mysteries out there that we may never fully understand.
I like that, and maybe that's part of the reason these stories continue to fascinate us. They remind us that even in our modern world, with all our technology and explanations, there are still things out there that we don't know, that we can't fully explain.
Absolutely. There's a sense of wonder and awe that comes with acknowledging the unknown.
Well, there you have it. The white thing, a creature of mystery, a legend that continues to capture the imagination, and maybe just maybe a reminder that even in our modern world, there are still places where the wild things are.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of one of West Virginia's most enduring mysteries.
And to all our listeners out there, remember, if you're ever hiking in the West Virginia woods, especially at night, keep your eyes open and your ears peeled. You never know what you might encounter.
And don't forget to check out our latest ebook on the white thing. It's part of our Cryptid Hunter series, and you can download it right now at westvirginiamedialab.com.
Until next time, stay curious.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. The West Virginia Media Lab is all about celebrating our state and its people, businesses, stories, news, and folklore. If you love West Virginia like we do, be sure to comment below, then subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell to stay connected. Until next time, stay wild, wonderful, West Virginia.